From loyal guardians forced to fight to gods whose choices doomed an entire age, this is Dark Souls' most tragic backstories explained, Discorzi Cohen, Great Grey Wolf Sif. Sif's backstory is tragic because the boss fight isn't a test of your strength. It's you forcing your way through someone's final act of loyalty. When you reach Sif, you don't find a monster hunting you through the forest. You find a guardian standing over a grave, sword in mouth, refusing to leave. The arena isn't a lair, it's a memorial. If you've explored enough, the pieces line up. Sif is tied to Knight Artorias and the Abyss. The sword Sif wields is Artorias's, and the grave Sif protects is a reminder of what happened when Artorias went where he shouldn't have gone. And then the fight gets worse the longer it goes. Sif doesn't become more monstrous or enraged. Sif becomes more visibly strained. The wolf is still fighting, but you can feel it turning into something like desperation, like the body is failing while the purpose refuses to. What makes Sif's story hit so hard is that it reframes the entire battle. This isn't a creature defending treasure. It's a friend preventing you from repeating a tragedy. Sif isn't guarding the grave because of instinct. It's duty, grief with teeth, the kind of loyalty that outlives the person it was sworn to. And the most brutal part is that Sif is right to try. The Abyss destroyed Artorias. It corrupted legends, twisted heroism into horror, and left behind a world where good intentions aren't protection. Sif is a living warning sign. Don't go down that road, but Dark Souls doesn't give you a peaceful option. There's no dialogue choice, no gesture that ends it. Progress demands that you beat the Guardian. So the tragedy isn't only that Sif lost someone, it's that Sif keeps losing them. Every time someone shows up, reaches for that path, and makes Sif draw the sword again. And if Sif is the loyal friend left behind to guard a grave, the next tragic backstory is the one buried inside that grave. Because Artorias is what happens when a hero tries to carry the darkness alone. Knight Artorias, the hero who took the Abyss into his own body. Artorias is tragic because he didn't fail due to weakness. He failed because he tried to protect everyone by sacrificing himself in a fight that couldn't be won the normal way. By the time you encounter Artorias, the legend is already set. People talk about him like the perfect knight, the Abyss Walker, the one who crossed into darkness and survived. The story sounds clean, heroic, almost comforting, which is exactly why it hurts when you find the truth. In Ulasil, you don't meet a triumphant savior. You meet a broken warrior whose body and mind have been ravaged by the Abyss. His movements aren't elegant anymore. They're violent, desperate, like he's trying to outrun something inside himself. His arm hangs useless, and he compensates with raw aggression. It doesn't look like a duel. It looks like containment failing. Then there's the detail that recontextualizes everything. Artorias didn't go into the Abyss alone. He had Sif, and Sif survived because Artorias made sure of it. The game implies this without needing a speech. The grave, the sword, the fact that Sif is still there, still guarding. It points to one moment that defines Artorias' tragedy. In the middle of the Abyss, with corruption closing in, Artorias prioritized saving his companion over saving himself. His shield becomes a symbol of that decision, not as gear, but as evidence. A knight who used his last strength to protect someone else while he was being consumed. Artorias' tragedy is that his legend is built on a lie, and the lie exists because the truth is unbearable. He wasn't the hero who defeated the Abyss. He was the hero who got swallowed by it while trying to hold the line long enough for someone else to live. The world needed a victory story, so history rewrote him into one. But when you fight him, you're not fighting the legendary Abyss Walker at full strength. You're fighting what's left after the Abyss took its share. A man still swinging not because he's confident, but because stopping would mean admitting the sacrifice was for nothing. That's the cruel genius of Dark Souls. It makes you finish what he started, but it doesn't let you pretend it's noble. You're not restoring his honor. You're witnessing the cost of it. Artorias becomes a warning about heroism itself. The idea that courage isn't always rewarded, and that being the one who goes first often means being the one who doesn't come back. And if Artorias shows how legends are built to hide unbearable truths, the next tragic backstory is about someone whose suffering was never hidden at all. Because his curse is written across his body, his mind, and the way he begs you to stop. Griggs of Vinheim. Griggs' story hits hard because it isn't a dramatic downfall. It's watching someone smart, hopeful, and curious slowly lose himself to a world that doesn't forgive weakness. When you first meet Griggs, he's not a warrior, and he's not pretending to be one. He's a sorcerer, polite, grateful, and genuinely relieved believed to be rescued. He talks like someone who still believes knowledge can matter more than brute force, like learning is a way out, and for a while, it seems like that's true. He offers spells, he shares information, he stays near Firelink Shrine trying to hold on to the last scraps of safety in a collapsing world. But then the pattern begins, one that Dark Souls is especially cruel about. If you follow his story and progress far enough, Griggs eventually leaves. He goes looking for more powerful sorcery, drawn toward the promise of Logan's knowledge, toward the idea that if he learns enough, he can survive what's coming. When you find him again, it's not a triumphant reunion. He's hollowed, not as a boss, not as a big set piece, just another empty body in a world full of them, his purpose stripped away by obsession and time. The same man who once spoke with gratitude now exists as proof that intelligence doesn't protect you from the curse. What makes Griggs' backstory so heavy is how ordinary it feels in the context of Dark Souls. There isn't a single dramatic moment where he falls. There isn't a cutscene that marks the turning point. His decline is quiet, like a slow leak you don't notice until the room is already underwater, and that's exactly why it works. Griggs represents the player who tries to win with preparation, planning, and study. He's the one who believes the right spell, the right teacher, the right secret will keep him safe. Dark Souls disagrees. It treats curiosity like a vulnerability. The world doesn't punish him because he's evil or arrogant. It punishes him because he keeps reaching forward in a place where reaching forward is what gets you killed. His hollowing isn't a plot twist. It's a reminder. In Lordran, even small hope is expensive. And if Griggs shows how easily a person can fade away without anyone noticing, the next backstory is about someone who refuses to fade at all, because her duty keeps her standing long after her world is already ended. Anastacia of Astora, the Firelink keeper who can't even speak for herself. Anastacia's story cuts deep because she's trapped in a role that demands sacrifice, and she isn't even allowed the dignity of telling you her side of it. You meet Anastacia at Firelink Shrine in the most unassuming way possible. She's sitting there, calm, silent, bound to a place that feels like the last safe breath in Lordran. The first detail you learn about her is also the most unsettling. She's mute, and it isn't an accident. Her tongue was cut out. Firelink isn't just a hub, it's a symbol. It's the place players return to for relief, leveling, and stability. And the entire comfort of that location is tied to her existence as a firekeeper, someone whose purpose is to maintain the flame and serve as an anchor for others. Then the game proves how fragile that comfort really is. If you leave and return later, you can find Firelink's bonfire extinguished and Anastacia dead. The shrine that felt safe became cold. The feeling isn't "I failed a quest," it's the world can still reach into your one peaceful place and ruin it. And when you pursue the one responsible, you recover her firekeeper soul, this tiny piece of her essence, literally treated as an item to be taken, used, traded, and moved around in an inventory like it's just another resource. If you choose to bring her back, she returns, but she still can't speak. The role continues. The sacrifice continues. The game doesn't offer closure so much as it offers the restoration of function. What makes Anastacia so heavy is the way Dark Souls frames her existence. Necessary, silent, and replaceable. She's a person, but the world treats her like a mechanism. She's the Firelink keeper, not Anastacia. Her suffering is baked into the job description. Even the violence done to her, her tongue removed, feels like part of the system of control around firekeepers. They're meant to serve, meant to stay, meant to preserve the flame for others. And it's impossible not to feel the imbalance. You come and go, you make choices, you chase goals, and she remains seated in the same spot, holding up a fragile pocket of stability you depend on. Her story is a reminder that Lordran's safe zones aren't safe because the world is kind. They're safe because someone is paying the cost, and Anastacia paid it in silence. And if Anastacia shows what it means to be forced into duty until it strips away your voice, the next story follows someone who walks into Lordran with faith and structure, only to learn that devotion doesn't protect you here. It makes you easier to break. Rhea of Thorlund. Rhea's story is brutal because her holy mission doesn't save her from darkness. It delivers her straight into it, step by step, until there's nothing left to rescue. When you first meet Rhea, she's not framed like a doomed character. She arrives with purpose, a cleric on pilgrimage, surrounded by companions, convinced that devotion and duty mean something in Lordran. Then the mission starts stripping her down. Her escorts, Vince and Nico, don't remain protectors for long. Their fate turns them into obstacles you can end up fighting later, which is already a grim statement. Even the people sent to keep her safe get swallowed by the same curse as everyone else. Rhea herself ends up trapped in the Tomb of the Giants, a place that feels like the world's basement, lightless, hostile, and designed to make hope feel ridiculous. When you find her there, she isn't triumphant or enlightened. She's shaken, cornered, and clinging to the idea that someone will still come for her. If you bring her back to Firelink, she returns to function as a miracle vendor, but the tone is wrong. She doesn't feel restored, she feels displaced. And depending on how events unfold, her story can end end in a way that's almost cruelly mundane. Not with a boss fight, not with glory, but with her being exploited and discarded by forces she never truly understood. It's not one catastrophic event, it's a chain of losses. What makes Rhea hit so hard is that she's the rare character in Dark Souls who starts with something resembling innocence, real belief, real structure, real certainty, and the game dismantles it methodically. Her pilgrimage isn't portrayed as heroic in hindsight. It's portrayed as naive. Lordran doesn't reward faith. It tests how long you'll keep believing when the world provides nothing back. Rhea keeps moving forward because that's what she was taught to do, and the world uses that obedience against her. And unlike warriors who choose risk, Rhea's downfall feels like institutional cruelty. She was sent into a place that devours people, armed with prayer and expectation, then blamed for not surviving it cleanly. Her story becomes one of the darkest themes in Dark Souls 1. Devotion doesn't protect you from exploitation. It can make you easier to exploit. And if Rhea shows what happens when faith becomes a trap, the next backstory is about someone who starts with pure optimism instead, and slowly realizes the light he's chasing might not be real at all. Solaire of Astora. Solaire's backstory is one of the hardest to sit with because he doesn't start broken. He starts bright, and the world slowly teaches him that even brightness can be consumed. When you meet Solaire, he's immediately different from almost everyone else in Lordran. He's friendly, he's open, he speaks with calm certainty about jolly cooperation like it's not a joke, and somehow he makes you want to believe him. He also has a purpose. He's searching for his own sun. At first, that sounds inspiring, like he's chasing meaning in a place designed to erase it. But as you follow his story, that purpose starts to look less like a dream, and more like an obsession. He isn't searching for the sun the way someone searches for truth. He's searching for it the way someone searches for relief. And then you reach the moment that made Solaire famous worldwide. Deep into the game, after enough time has passed and enough failures have piled up, Solaire can end up in a state where he's no longer himself, either because a parasitic sunlight maggot latches onto him, or because the search finally breaks him. In that outcome, the very thing he was chasing becomes the thing that destroys him. He believes he found his sun, and it's literally a parasite eating his mind. The most painful detail is how happy he sounds right before it turns. He isn't raging, he isn't terrified, he's relieved. What makes Solaire's story hit so hard is that it turns one of the game's few sources of warmth into a warning. Dark Souls doesn't just punish greed or arrogance, it punishes longing. Solaire's sun is basically a stand-in for whatever keeps a person going. Purpose, identity, hope, belonging. In another story, that search would be rewarded. In Lordran, it becomes dangerous because the world is full of false lights, things that look like salvation until you're close enough to realize they're hungry. And the tragedy isn't only the bad ending version of Solaire, it's the fact that the bad ending feels earned by the setting. It makes sense that a hopeful person would be vulnerable here. It makes sense that something would take advantage of that optimism. It makes sense that the thing he wants most becomes the thing that unravels him. Solaire doesn't fall because he was foolish. He falls because he refused to stop believing that something good could exist in a world that specializes in twisting good things. And if Solaire shows how hope can be weaponized against you, the next backstory is even crueler, because it's about a woman who did everything right, followed duty perfectly, and still ended up condemned for it. Quelaag and the Fair Lady. Quelaag's story is devastating because what looks like monstrosity is actually devotion. A sister doing something horrifying for someone she refuses to abandon. Blighttown is already a nightmare. Poison swamps, filth, decay, and that feeling that the world is trying to make you regret having curiosity. At the bottom of it all, you meet Chaos Witch Quelaag, half woman, half spider, guarding a bell you're required to ring. To most players, she's just another boss, until you learn what's behind her. Hidden nearby is Quelaag's sister, the Fair Lady, a sick, weakened being tied to the Chaos Flame's aftermath. She's blind, fragile, and suffering constantly. If you join her covenant, it becomes clear Quelaag's purpose isn't conquest or cruelty, it's supply. Quelaag hunts to gather humanity, bringing it back as a kind of sustenance to ease the Fair Lady's pain. Every time Quelaag fights you, it isn't because she wants to, it's because she has to keep feeding the one person she still cares about in a world that burned their entire family into monsters. And the worst part is the setting itself. The Fair Lady isn't recovering. She's declining. This isn't a problem that ends. It's a slow, permanent suffering that Quelaag is trying to manage with violence. What makes their story hit so hard is that Dark Souls flips the usual moral framing. You aren't slaying an evil spider witch to cleanse the world. You're killing a caretaker who's been doing the only thing that still works. Quelaag's existence This is a response to catastrophe. The Witch of Izalith's attempt to recreate the first flame created chaos instead, and the fallout twisted her daughters into abominations. So Quelaag's monstrous form isn't a choice, it's a consequence, and her actions are a warped kind of compassion. Because in Lordran, love doesn't get rewarded with healing. It gets rewarded with longer suffering. Quelaag can't fix her sister. She can only reduce the pain temporarily, feeding humanity into a situation that will never truly improve, which makes fighting her feel morally upside down. You need the bell. The game demands progress, but the more you understand what you're interrupting, the less satisfying victory becomes. You didn't end evil. You ended devotion. And if Quelaag's story is about love, surviving in a corrupted body, the next backstory is the opposite kind of heartbreak. A warrior who lost everything, then kept walking anyway, hoping the next battle would finally be the one that meant something. The giant blacksmith. This backstory hurts because it takes something that should be mythic, a godlike figure, and shows what Lordran really does to greatness. It doesn't always kill it, it diminishes it. Hidden in Anor Londo is a blacksmith most players barely notice on a first run. The giant blacksmith. He's gentle, lonely, and oddly patient in a place that's otherwise cold and hostile. He forges weapons for you with the same calm routine, as if this is all he's ever known. But if you pay attention to his identity, it gets darker. Dark Souls implies he isn't just a giant who smiths. He's tied to the divine infrastructure of Anor Londo, a being significant enough that his craft feels like part of the god's machinery. Yet his reality is painfully small. One locked room, one repetitive task, one dwindling purpose in a city that's already hollow. And depending on what you do in the story, you can end up turning his last connection to meaning into nothing. If Anor Londo's illusion is broken, the entire place collapses into its true emptiness, and he remains still working, still alone, as if the world ended and nobody bothered to tell him. If he dies, he doesn't die with epic music or a cutscene. He dies quietly, the kind of death that suggests he was never treated like a god in the first place, just a tool. What makes this so heavy is that it reframes divinity. In Dark Souls, the gods aren't portrayed as eternal, untouchable beings. They're portrayed as rulers whose power was always dependent on systems. Illusion, worship, control of flame. Once those systems weaken, even the divine becomes small. The giant blacksmith embodies that theme in the simplest way possible. His tragedy isn't that he's suffering loudly. It's that he's been left behind in a world that moved on without him. He continues his duty because duty is all that remains. There's no glory in it, just routine. And that's one of the most painful things Dark Souls does. It shows you characters who weren't defeated in battle. They were defeated by irrelevance. And if the giant blacksmith shows what it looks like when greatness is reduced to routine, the next backstory takes that same idea and turns it violent, because it's about a warrior whose love didn't fade into loneliness. It mutated into rage that could never be satisfied. Siegmeyer of Katarina. Siegmeyer's story hits so hard because he isn't destroyed by a single enemy. He's destroyed by the moment he realizes he no longer knows why he's still fighting. When you first meet Siegmeyer, he feels like comic relief. The round armor, the warm voice, the pauses like he's buffering in real life. He's upbeat, polite, and determined to be a brave adventurer, even when he's clearly stuck outside Sen's fortress like a man staring at a locked door pretending it's a philosophical choice. But every time you run into him after that, the pattern becomes clearer. Siegmeyer's adventure is mostly him arriving at danger, hesitating, and waiting for an opening that never comes. In Sen's fortress, he's blocked and uncertain. In Anor Londo, he's trapped in a room with enemies he can't confidently handle alone. Later, he walks straight into Blighttown and then Lost Izalith, places that grind down even prepared players. And then you meet Sieglinde, his daughter, searching for him. That detail reframes him completely. He isn't just a wandering knight. He's a father who left home chasing meaning, and now someone who loves him has to chase him through hell to bring him back. The most devastating part is how his story can end depending on how events play out. Even if you help him repeatedly, saving him, clearing enemies, creating the opening he needs, his fate can still spiral into hollowing, as if being rescued too often becomes its own kind of defeat. Because the more you solve problems for him, the less he feels like a knight, and the more he feels like a liability. Eventually, the tone changes. The cheerful adventurer energy drains out. What's left is a man realizing that the identity he built his life around might not be real anymore. Siegmeyer represents one of Dark Souls' cruelest ideas. Survival isn't the same thing as meaning. He wants to be brave. He wants to be useful. He wants to be the kind of hero who pushes forward in the face of impossible odds. But Lordran isn't a place that rewards intention. It rewards outcomes. If you can't act decisively, you get stuck. If you get stuck long enough, you lose purpose. And when you lose purpose in Dark Souls, you don't just get sad, you hollow. That's why his story feels so human. He isn't evil, arrogant, or corrupted by power. He's simply someone trying to prove he matters, and slowly realizing the world doesn't care. The tragedy isn't that he fails once, it's that he keeps surviving long enough to watch his self-image collapse. And Sieglinda's presence makes it worse, because it proves he had something real waiting for him, a life outside this nightmare. But Lordran doesn't release people cleanly. It keeps them wandering until their quest becomes their prison. Siegmeyer doesn't fall because he's weak. He falls because he runs out of reasons. Siegmeyer shows what happens when purpose runs out in a dying world. But the next story is about the person whose single choice is the reason that world is still dying at all. Gwyn, Lord of Sunlight. Gwyn's backstory is crushing because he didn't save the world. He prolonged it, and the price of that refusal echoes through every ruined life you meet in Dark Souls 1. Gwyn is the figure everything points back to. The Age of Fire, the gods of Anor Londo, the entire structure of order in Lordran. It exists because Gwyn took control of the First Flame and built a civilization around it, but fire fades. That's the fundamental rule of this universe. When the flame began to die, Gwyn didn't accept the transition into the Age of Dark. Instead, he did something desperate and defining. He linked the fire, sacrificing himself to keep the Age of Fire going. And the result isn't a bright, renewed world. It's the world you actually play in, a decayed kingdom trapped in a prolonged dying state, where time is distorted, gods have fled or hidden behind illusion, and countless undead wander without purpose. Then you finally reach him, not on a golden throne, not surrounded by glory. You find Gwyn as a husk, a burned-out remnant in the kiln, still fighting, not like a lord defending his kingdom, but like a man who never stopped clinging to the one decision that defined him. The music isn't triumphant, it's mournful. The fight itself feels less like final boss, and more like putting down the last living piece of a failing age. What makes Gwyn's story so heavy is that his fear shaped reality. He wasn't just trying to preserve his power, he was trying to preserve an entire worldview. Light over dark, gods over humanity, permanence over change. But in doing that, he didn't defeat the natural cycle. He broke it. Linking the fire becomes the original sin of Dark Souls' world. It creates the undead curse. It creates the stagnation. It turns existence into a loop where people keep relighting something that's meant to fade, and every relighting makes the next decline uglier. Gwyn is tragic because he's not framed as a cartoon villain. His decision makes emotional sense. If you built a world on fire, the dark looks like extinction. But the game's cruelty is that his solution doesn't prevent suffering. It multiplies it across centuries. By the time you arrive, Gwyn isn't a tyrant reigning at the top. He's the first casualty of his own refusal to let go, and the reason everyone else became casualties too. So when you fight him, you're not just defeating a boss. You're stepping into a cycle he started, and being asked silently whether you'll keep it going. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more Soulsborne deep dives like this, make sure to like, drop a comment with the backstory that hit you the hardest, and I'll catch you in the next one. Subscribe and click the video on screen now.